Imagine a small-town diner on a quiet afternoon. A black father and his young, visibly ill son are simply trying to enjoy their meal when the unexpected happens. A uniformed officer strides in, his piercing gaze landing on them. What starts as a simple interaction quickly takes a disturbing turn. The officer's comments grow sharper, his tone more demeaning, and it's clear this isn't about upholding the law, it's personal. The father remains calm, his silence masking a secret that could change everything. Little does the officer know, the man he's humiliating isn't just any father. He's a highly trained FBI agent with years of experience in exposing injustice. As tensions rise and the officer's arrogance spirals out of control, the room falls silent. What happens next will leave you questioning everything you think you know about power, prejudice, and resilience. Stay tuned. This story is just getting started. The officer's voice grows louder, drawing the attention of everyone in the diner. He questions the father and son, his words laced with condescension. "What are you doing here?" He sneers, making it clear that they don't belong, at least in his eyes. The father, whose calm demeanor hides a fire simmering beneath, responds politely, refusing to escalate the situation. He focuses on comforting his son, whose pale face and tired eyes reveal he's battling something far more serious than this unwarranted harassment. As the officer continues his tirade, the father's sharp, calculating mind is already piecing together the bigger picture. He notices the officer's badge number, his name tag, even the way the man carries himself. This isn't the first time the father has dealt with someone abusing their power, but the officer doesn't know that yet. The air in the room is thick with tension, and everyone is waiting to see what will happen next. The other diners glance nervously at the scene unfolding, their eyes darting between the officer and the father. Some seem uncomfortable but remain silent, while others watch with quiet curiosity, unsure of how to react. The father senses their unease but keeps his focus steady, his protective instincts kicking in as his son coughs softly beside him. The officer leans closer, his voice dripping with authority as he demands identification. The father hesitates for a moment, carefully weighing his next move. He could comply, diffuse the situation, and let it end here, or he could challenge the injustice head-on. Meanwhile, the son tugs gently at his father's sleeve, his quiet voice breaking the tense silence. "Dad, can we go home now?" The words cut through the father like a knife. He knows his son doesn't deserve this, none of this, but walking away would mean letting the officer's behavior go unchecked, and that, he knows, could embolden the man to target someone else. The father's FBI instincts kick in, recognizing patterns, reading body language. He decides to hold his ground, but not before observing the officer's every move. What's his story? What's driving this hostility? The father stays calm, but his resolve hardens. He's not just protecting his son, he's preparing for the moment the truth will shift the balance of power. The officer's voice turns sharper, his tone thick with intimidation. He questions the father again, his words echoing through the diner like a challenge. "Why don't you show me some ID? Unless you've got something to hide." The father looks up, his steady gaze meeting the officer's for the first time. There's no fear in his eyes, only quiet confidence. His son grips his hand tighter, his small fingers trembling, and the father knows he has to play this moment just right. One misstep could escalate the situation further, putting his son at even greater risk. The other diners hold their breath as the tension thickens. A waitress near the counter nervously fidgets with her notepad, clearly debating whether to intervene, but ultimately deciding against it. The officer, emboldened by the lack of resistance, leans in closer. "You think you're above the law?" He sneers, his words oozing arrogance. The father reaches into his pocket, moving deliberately, and pulls out his wallet. He pauses, holding it firmly in his hand, letting the silence stretch. The officer smirks, clearly assuming he's won this standoff, but the father's calm demeanor doesn't waver. Instead of handing over his ID, he quietly speaks. "Officer," he says evenly, his voice low but commanding. "Do you really know who you're talking to?" The question hangs in the air like a thundercloud, and for the first time, the officer falters. The officer narrows his eyes, his smirk fading just slightly. "I don't care who you are," he snaps, though there's a flicker of uncertainty in his voice. The father, still calm, opens his wallet, but doesn't hand over his ID just yet. Instead, he pulls out a card, simple, official, and unmistakable. He places it on the table between them, the bold letters spelling out Federal Bureau of Investigation. The officer's face freezes as he reads the words, his arrogance giving way to a flash of panic. The father watches him closely, not breaking eye contact. But just as the room begins to shift, the officer recovers, doubling down. "I don't care if you're FBI," he says, his voice louder, trying to regain control of the situation. "That doesn't put you above the law." His words are defiant, but his composure cracks ever so slightly. Before the father can respond, the door to the diner swings open. Another officer walks in, his expression serious. He glances between the father, the sick child, and his colleague. "What's going on here?" The newcomer asks, his tone measured but firm. The first officer stiffens, clearly caught off guard. The father senses an opportunity, but he's cautious. Something about the new arrival seems different, calculated. The stakes have just been raised, and the father knows he's no longer dealing with one challenge but two. The room is silent, every person watching to see what will unfold next. The first officer steps back slightly, his posture rigid as the second officer surveys the scene. The father remains seated, his son leaning against him, exhausted but alert. The second officer picks up the FBI card from the table, his expression unreadable as he examines it. "Is this for real?" he asks quietly, glancing at the father. The father nods, his calm gaze unwavering. "I didn't come here to make trouble," he says, his voice steady. "I came here to take care of my son." The second officer turns to his colleague, his tone sharp. "Do you realize what you've done? Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" The first officer stumbles over his words, his earlier confidence now replaced by uncertainty. "I didn't know. He didn't say anything." He begins, but the second officer cuts him off. "That's the problem. You didn't ask, you assumed." Just when it seems the situation is diffused, the father speaks again. "I wasn't going to escalate this," he says, his voice calm but carrying weight. "But I can't let this go. My son deserves better. Everyone does." He looks directly at the second officer, who nods slowly, understanding the gravity of the moment. Then, the twist comes. The father stands and pulls out a second badge, a special task force designation. "I'm also investigating misconduct in law enforcement," he says, his voice firm. "And this interaction just became part of my report." The first officer's face drains of color, and the second officer stiffens, clearly caught off guard by the revelation. The father turns to his son, gently helping him to his feet. "Let's go home," he says softly. As they leave the diner, the room is silent, the weight of what just happened settling over everyone. The father knows this isn't the end. It's only the beginning of a much larger fight. But for now, he's won the battle that matters most. As the father and son step outside into the fresh air, the boy looks up at his dad, his tired eyes filled with curiosity. "Dad, are you mad?" he asks softly. The father kneels down, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "I'm not mad," he says gently. "But when something isn't right, we have to stand up for ourselves and for others. That's how we make things better." Inside the diner, the tension lingers. The first officer stares at the floor, knowing his actions won't go unnoticed. The second officer remains silent, clearly processing the weight of the father's parting words. Around them, the diners whisper among themselves, the incident sparking quiet reflections. As the father buckles his son into the car, he feels a sense of purpose. Today wasn't just about them. It was about challenging a system that needs to change. And while this chapter ends here, the fight for justice is far from over.